you ever watched a story that slowly pulls you in, and before you even realize it, you're completely lost inside its world? The Blind Side is one of those films that doesn't just entertain, it makes you feel every moment. From the very beginning, the movie builds a sense of mystery and tension, where every scene carries meaning and every character hides something deeper beneath the surface. As the story unfolds, you start to see how small decisions lead to unexpected consequences. The film takes you through intense moments, emotional turns, and powerful scenes that keep you hooked till the very end. It's not just about what happens, it's about why it happens and how it changes everything. The characters in this film are not simple. Each one has a purpose, a backstory, and a role that connects to the bigger picture. Their performances bring life to the story, making every scene feel real and impactful. But what truly makes The Blind Side stand out is the way it was created. The vision behind the story, the effort put into its production, and the ideas that inspired it. Every detail, from storytelling to execution, adds something unique to the overall experience. In this video, we're going to break down the complete story, explore the characters, and analyze everything from its creation to its success. And just to be clear, this is not a full movie or a movie screening. It's a detailed review and analysis made for learning and entertainment purposes. So let's begin and take a closer look at The Blind Side. When I watched The Blind Side, I expected a simple sports movie where an underdog struggles and then succeeds, but the film takes a different path right from the beginning. It does not open with a big game or training montage. It starts with Michael O'Hare, a teenager who feels lost inside the system. People call him Big Mike, but behind that name you see a quiet, uncertain boy who has never really had a stable place to belong. From the first few scenes, it becomes clear that this is not just about football. It is about survival, identity, and finding a place in the world. Michael's background hits hard because he has been moving from one foster home to another, never settling, and every time he ends up going back to his biological mother who is dealing with addiction. There is no heavy drama in how this is shown. The film keeps it simple and real, and that is what makes it more powerful. You feel his loneliness without the movie forcing you to feel it. Then we move into the school setting, where Michael gets admitted to Wingate Christian School mainly because of his size and physical presence. At first, this feels like a typical setup you see in many sports films, but the movie quickly shifts focus. Even in school, Michael feels like an outsider. He does not fit into any group, he barely speaks, and he moves through the environment like someone who does not expect to be noticed. The first real shift happens when he meets SJ, a younger kid who treats him normally. This might seem like a small moment, but it carries weight because it is the first time someone interacts with him without judgment or hesitation. From here, the tone of the film starts to change slowly. The real turning point comes when Lee and Tui sees Michael walking alone at night in the cold. This scene stands out because it is handled in a very simple and natural way. There is no over-dramatic setup. She just sees a boy with nowhere to go and makes a decision to help him. She offers him a place to stay, and that single action drives the entire story forward. What I liked here is that her character does not rely on emotional speeches. She acts first, and that makes her feel strong and real. When Michael enters the Tui home, you can immediately sense that he is uncomfortable. He is not used to this kind of environment, and the film takes its time to show that adjustment. He does not suddenly become part of the family overnight. In fact, the next morning he leaves quietly, which feels very realistic. Trust does not come easy to him, and the film respects that. As the story continues, you start to see how the Tui family gradually accepts him, and more importantly, how he starts accepting them. Collins, Leon's daughter, plays a key role here. Instead of showing fear or rejection, she treats Michael with respect, and that helps break the barrier even further. Leon's friends, however, represent the other side of society. They question her decision, they bring up concerns, and they judge Michael based on how he looks and where he comes from. These moments add realism because they reflect how people react in real life. Not everyone is immediately supportive. Leon's response to them shows her strength. She does not back down, and she makes it clear that she sees Michael as a person, not a risk. At the same time, the film starts exploring Michael's abilities. There is an interesting detail where it is revealed that he has a very strong protective instinct. This becomes the foundation for his growth in football. When he first joins the team, he struggles. Not because he is weak, but because he does not understand how to use his strength in that environment. This is where Lee steps in again and gives him a simple idea: treat the quarterback like family, protect him the same way you would protect them. That moment is very important because it connects his emotional instinct with his physical role on the field. After that, you see a clear change in his performance. He becomes more confident, more aware, and more focused. The film does not rush this transformation. It also shows his academic struggles, which are just as important as his physical growth. The introduction of Miss Sue as a tutor adds another layer to his journey. She is direct, honest, and supportive, and her role helps show that success for Michael is not just about sports. It is about building a complete foundation. As his grades improve, his opportunities grow, and now the story expands into the next phase: college recruitment. Multiple schools show interest in him, and for a moment, it feels like he is finally in control of his future. But the film does not let everything stay smooth. The investigation by the NSA introduces tension again. It questions the intentions of the Tui family and whether they influenced his decision for their own benefit. This part adds complexity to the story because it forces Michael to question everything. He starts wondering if the family that helped him did it for the right reasons or if there was something else behind it. This internal conflict is handled in a grounded way. He does not explode emotionally, he steps back, he thinks, and he looks for answers. His return to his old neighborhood is one of the most intense parts of the film. It reminds you of where he came from and what he escaped. The confrontation with the gang and the threat they pose brings back the danger that always existed in his life. It also shows how much he has changed. He is no longer the same quiet, withdrawn boy. He stands up, he reacts, and he protects what matters to him. This moment connects everything: his past, his growth, and his instincts. When he finally makes his decision about college, it feels earned. He chooses Ole Miss not because of pressure, but because he sees the Tuis as his family. That line where he says he chose it because it is where his family goes hits in a simple but effective way. It does not try to be overly emotional, but it lands because of everything that led up to it. Overall, The Blind Side works because it stays grounded. It does not try to be more than what it is. It focuses on one journey and tells it clearly. The performances, especially Sandra Bullock's, add strength to the story, but what really holds the film together is its simplicity. It does not rely on big twists or exaggerated drama. It moves step by step, showing how one decision can change someone's life. And as a viewer, especially watching it in a focused setting, it feels less like a movie and more like a real story unfolding in front of you. As the story moves into the college phase, the tone shifts again, but it does not lose its grounded feel, and this is where the film starts focusing more on Michael's independence rather than just his development. Up to this point, most of his progress was guided by the Tui family, especially Lee, but now you begin to see how he starts making decisions on his own. The recruitment process itself is shown in a controlled way, not overly dramatic, but enough to show how valuable he has become as a player. Different coaches come in, conversations happen, and for the first time, Michael is in a position where people are chasing him instead of ignoring him. This change is important because it highlights how far he has come, not just physically but mentally. At the same time, SJ's involvement adds a lighter tone to these moments, but it also shows how deeply connected the family has become with Michael's journey. SJ treats the entire process like a shared mission, and that adds a sense of unity without making it feel forced. The NCAA investigation brings tension back into the story, but in a very controlled and realistic way. Instead of turning it into a big dramatic conflict, the film uses it to create doubt in Michael's mind. He starts questioning whether the people who helped him had another motive. This is where the film becomes more interesting because it does not just show growth, it shows uncertainty as well. Michael's reaction to the situation is not loud or dramatic, it is internal. He walks away, he goes back to his old neighborhood, and he tries to reconnect with where he came from. That entire sequence feels raw because it strips away the stability he had built and places him back into an environment that once defined him. The interaction with the gang and the tension that builds there reminds you that his past is not something that disappeared, it is something he had to rise above. What stands out in this part is how the film handles Michael's decision-making. He is no longer being guided step by step. He takes time, he reflects, and then he makes his choice. When he returns and completes the interview, his answer is simple, but it carries weight because of everything he has experienced. He chooses Ole Miss not because of pressure or influence, but because he sees the Tuohys as his family. That moment does not feel forced or overly emotional. It feels natural, and that is what makes it effective. The film stays consistent with its tone. It does not try to exaggerate the emotion, it lets the journey speak for itself. From a viewing perspective, this final stretch of the film feels balanced. It does not rush the ending, but it also does not stretch it unnecessarily. It gives enough space to show where Michael is heading while still keeping the focus on how he got there. The closing moments, where you see real photos and information about Michael O'Hare's actual career, connect the story back to reality. It reminds you that what you just watched is not just a scripted journey, it is based on a real person who went through these experiences. If I talk about the overall experience, The Blind Side works because of its simplicity and clarity. It does not try to overload the story with unnecessary elements. It focuses on one life, one journey, and shows how consistent support and the right environment can change everything. There are moments where it feels predictable, especially if you are familiar with sports dramas, but the emotional core keeps it engaging. Sandra Bullock's performance stands out the most, not because it is overly dramatic, but because it feels controlled and real. She carries the film without making it feel like it revolves only around her. At the same time, the film is not perfect. Some parts feel a bit simplified, especially when it comes to deeper social issues. It does not go very deep into those areas, and it keeps things more surface level to maintain a smooth flow. But for a general audience, this approach works because it keeps the story easy to follow and emotionally accessible. As the story moves into the college phase, the tone shifts but stays grounded, and this is where the focus turns more toward Michael's independence rather than just his development, because up to this point most of his growth was guided by the Tuohy family, especially Lee but now you start to see him making his own decisions and understanding his own value as different colleges begin recruiting him, and for the first time people are chasing him instead of ignoring him, which shows how far he has come both mentally and physically, while at the same time the Enze investigation adds a layer of tension that feels realistic rather than dramatic, as it creates doubt in Michael's mind about whether the family helped him out of care or for their own benefit, and instead of reacting loudly he steps back and returns to his old neighborhood, which becomes one of the most powerful parts of the film because it reminds you of his past and the environment he had to escape, and when he faces that world again you see how much he has changed, not just in strength but in awareness and control, and from there his decision-making feels earned because he takes time to think instead of being pushed, and when he finally chooses Ole Miss, saying it is because that is where his family goes, the moment lands in a simple but effective way since the entire journey has built up to that point, and the film closes without forcing emotion, showing real images and information about Michael O'Hare, which connects the story back to reality and makes it feel more meaningful, and overall the movie works because it stays simple and focused. It does not rely on big twists or heavy drama. It builds its impact through steady progression and character connection, with Sandra Bullock delivering a strong and controlled performance that supports the story without overpowering it. Although some parts feel slightly simplified, especially when it comes to deeper social issues, but the film chooses clarity over complexity, which makes it easy to follow and emotionally engaging, and by the end it feels less like a typical sports movie and more like a personal journey about how support, trust, and the right environment can completely change someone's life. When I watched The Blind Side, I expected a typical sports drama that follows a familiar pattern where a struggling athlete rises to success, but the film immediately sets a different tone by focusing on Michael O'Hare as a person before anything else, showing a quiet, withdrawn teenager who has spent most of his life moving between foster homes, never finding stability, and always drifting back to his biological mother who is dealing with addiction. And this opening phase is handled in a very controlled and realistic way without heavy dramatization, which makes the emotional weight feel more genuine because you are not being told how to feel, you are simply observing his situation unfold, and as the story moves into the school environment, you see that even in a structured setting Michael still feels disconnected, he does not fit into any group, he barely speaks, and he carries himself like someone who has learned to stay invisible, and this is where the introduction of SJ becomes important because he is the first person who treats Michael normally without hesitation or judgment, and that small interaction begins to shift the tone of the story, but the real turning point comes when Lee and Tui sees Michael walking alone at night in the cold, and this moment stands out because it is handled with simplicity, there is no dramatic buildup, she just makes a decision to help him, and that decision becomes the foundation of everything that follows. And what makes her character strong is not just what she says but what she does. She brings him into her home without overthinking it, and when Michael enters that environment you can clearly see his discomfort because he is not used to stability or kindness in that form, and the film takes its time to show how slowly he adjusts instead of rushing the process, which makes it feel believable, and even when he leaves the next morning without saying anything it fits his character because trust is something he has never really experienced, and as the story continues the Tui family begins to integrate him into their lives, but this is not shown as an instant transformation, it happens gradually through small interactions, conversations, and shared moments, and Colin's reaction is important because she accepts him without fear, which breaks another barrier, while Lee Ann's social circle represents the opposite side by questioning her decision and projecting their own assumptions, and this contrast adds realism because not everyone responds the same way to situations like this, and Lee Ann's refusal to be influenced by those opinions reinforces her character as someone who acts based on conviction rather than pressure, and as Michael's life begins to stabilize the film shifts toward his potential, revealing that he has a strong protective instinct, which becomes the key to understanding his role in football, and when he first joins the team he struggles not because of lack of ability, but because he does not understand how to apply his strength, and the moment Lee Ann explains to him that his job is to protect the quarterback like he would protect his family becomes a turning point because it connects his emotional instincts to his physical actions. And from that point forward his performance begins to improve in a way that feels natural rather than exaggerated, and at the same time the film does not ignore his academic challenges, introducing Miss Sue as a tutor who plays a crucial role in helping him build a foundation beyond sports, and this balance between athletics and academics keeps the story grounded and prevents it from becoming one-dimensional, and as his grades improve and opportunities open up the narrative expands into the college recruitment phase, where multiple programs show interest in him, and for the first time Michael is in a position where he is valued and pursued, which highlights the contrast between his past and present, but the film does not allow this phase to remain smooth because the NCAA investigation introduces doubt, questioning whether the Tui family's intentions were genuine or influenced by their connection to Ole Miss, and this creates an internal conflict for Michael that is handled quietly rather than dramatically, as he begins to question everything and distances himself to find clarity. And his return to his old neighborhood becomes one of the most intense moments because it reconnects him with the environment he came from, showing that his past is still a part of him, and the confrontation that happens there reinforces how much he has changed, as he is no longer passive or withdrawn but aware and protective, and this moment brings together his growth, his instincts, and his identity in a way that feels complete. And when he finally returns to make his decision about college it feels earned because it comes from his own understanding rather than external pressure, and his statement that he chose Ole Miss because it is where his family goes carries weight not because of how it is delivered but because of everything that led to it. And the film closes by connecting the story back to reality with real images and information about Michael O'Hare's life and career, which reinforces that what you have just watched is based on a real journey, and overall the film works because it stays focused and consistent in its approach. It does not rely on dramatic twists or exaggerated storytelling. Instead it builds its impact through steady progression and character development. And while some aspects feel simplified, especially when it comes to deeper social issues, the film chooses clarity over complexity, making it accessible and emotionally effective, and Sandra Bullock's performance stands out because of how controlled and natural it feels, adding strength to the narrative without overshadowing it. And by the end, the film leaves you with a clear understanding that this is not just a story about football, it is about how stability, support, and belief can reshape someone's entire life trajectory in a way that feels real and grounded. As the story moves beyond Michael's decision and into the phase where his future starts taking shape, the film continues to build on the idea that growth is not a single moment but a continuous process. And this is where you start seeing how everything that was established earlier begins to carry forward into a more independent direction, because now Michael is no longer just reacting to opportunities. He is stepping into them with awareness, and the transition into college represents that shift clearly, where the environment is bigger, expectations are higher, and the support system that once guided him is no longer physically present in the same way, yet its influence remains visible in how he carries himself and how he approaches challenges. And what stands out here is that the film does not suddenly change his personality or turn him into a completely confident character overnight. Instead, it maintains consistency by showing that he still carries a quiet nature, but now that quietness is combined with understanding and purpose. And this balance keeps his character grounded and believable, while at the same time the connection with the Tui family continues to exist as a foundation rather than a dependency, because their role shifts from guiding him directly to being a source of stability that he can rely on when needed. And this subtle change shows that their relationship has matured, not just emotionally but structurally, and the film reinforces this by not overusing emotional scenes or dramatic callbacks. Instead, it allows the impact of their bond to exist naturally within the progression of Michael's life. And as his journey moves forward, the idea of identity becomes more defined, because earlier he was trying to find where he belonged, but now he begins to understand that his identity is not limited to one place or one situation. It is shaped by everything he has experienced, and this realization connects all parts of the story together, from his early struggles to his growth within the Tui family and finally to his path ahead. And what makes this phase effective is that it does not try to create new conflict or introduce unnecessary complications. It stays focused on progression, showing how the decisions he made earlier continue to influence his direction, and this keeps the narrative smooth and consistent, while also maintaining engagement without relying on external tension. And from a viewing perspective, this part of the film feels more reflective but still active, because instead of high-intensity moments, it gives you a sense of movement through development, and the pacing remains steady, allowing you to follow the transition without feeling rushed or slowed down. And the final impression that the film leaves is not built around a single dramatic event but around the complete journey that has been shown step by step, making it feel like a natural progression rather than a constructed ending. And this is what ultimately defines The Blind Side as a film that focuses more on the impact of consistent support and gradual growth rather than sudden change, keeping everything clear, grounded, and connected from start to finish. As the narrative continues forward from this point, the film keeps its focus on how Michael carries everything he has learned into a space where expectations are higher and structure is different. And this is where the journey feels less about being guided and more about maintaining what has already been built, because now the responsibility shifts fully onto him. And that shift is important because it shows that growth is not complete just because an opportunity has been achieved. It continues through how that opportunity is handled, and the film reflects this by keeping his character consistent. He does not suddenly become outspoken or overly confident. Instead, he remains calm and focused, but now there is a clear sense of direction in how he moves and how he responds to situations. And this subtle change carries more weight than a dramatic transformation would, because it feels real and earned, while at the same time the influence of the Tui family remains present in a way that does not feel forced. Their support is no longer about direct involvement in every decision. It becomes something that exists in the background, shaping how he thinks and how he approaches challenges. And this shows that their impact was not temporary, it became part of his foundation. And the film keeps reinforcing this idea without turning it into repeated emotional moments, which helps maintain a smooth flow. And as Michael continues on his path, the sense of belonging that he was searching for earlier in the story becomes clearer, not because he finds a perfect place, but because he understands that belonging comes from connection and trust rather than location. And this understanding ties back to everything that was shown from the beginning, creating a strong internal consistency in the narrative. And what stands out here is that the film does not try to introduce a final obstacle or dramatic twist to close the story. Instead, it allows the journey itself to be the focus, showing how each step leads naturally into the next. And this approach keeps the tone controlled and grounded, while still maintaining engagement through progression. And from a viewing perspective, this phase feels steady and complete without needing to be intense, because the impact comes from seeing how far the character has come and how he continues moving forward, and the pacing remains balanced, giving enough space to understand the transition without slowing the narrative down. And by the time this part unfolds, the story has already established everything it needed to, so what you are seeing now is not a new direction, but the continuation of a path that was built step by step, and that is what makes the experience feel connected from beginning to end, as it stays focused on development, consistency, and the long-term effect of support and opportunity rather than short-term dramatic peaks. As the journey continues to unfold, the film keeps reinforcing the idea that real change is not defined by one moment or one achievement, but by how consistently a person carries that change forward. And this is where Michael's story reaches a point where everything he has gone through begins to feel connected rather than separate, because earlier his life was divided between instability and brief moments of support, but now those elements merge into a single direction where he understands who he is and what he is capable of, and the film presents this progression without exaggeration, keeping his personality grounded and his behavior consistent with everything that has been established, which makes the transformation feel believable instead of forced, while at the same time the influence of the Tui family remains a key part of that transformation, not through constant presence but through the values and support they provided, which now exist as part of his decision-making process. And this subtle continuation of their role adds depth without shifting focus away from Michael himself. And as the narrative moves forward, the sense of stability that once felt unfamiliar to him now becomes something he carries naturally, and this change reflects not just external success but internal growth, because he is no longer reacting to life, he is actively shaping it. And that distinction is important in understanding how far he has come, and the film keeps its tone steady throughout this phase, avoiding unnecessary complications or dramatic shifts, instead allowing the progression to speak for itself, which creates a smooth and continuous experience for the viewer. And from a broader perspective, this part of the story highlights how support, opportunity, and personal effort combine to create lasting change, showing that none of these elements work in isolation, and by maintaining this focus, the film ensures that its message remains clear without needing to overstate it. And as the narrative continues in this direction, it becomes less about reaching a final destination and more about maintaining the path that has been built. And that approach keeps the story active and meaningful without relying on traditional ending structures, allowing it to feel complete while still moving forward in a natural and grounded way. As the story keeps moving forward, the film continues to build on the idea that growth becomes meaningful only when it stays consistent over time, and this is where Michael's journey feels fully connected from start to present, because everything he experienced earlier, the instability, the isolation, the struggle to belong, now exists as part of a foundation that supports him rather than something that holds him back. And this shift is shown in a very controlled way without sudden changes in tone or behavior, which keeps his character believable and grounded, while at the same time the influence of the Tui family remains clearly embedded in how he thinks and how he approaches decisions, not as direct guidance anymore but as something that has shaped his perspective. And this creates a balance where he is independent but not disconnected from the people who helped him reach this point. And the film maintains this balance carefully without turning it into repeated emotional emphasis, allowing the relationship to feel natural and continuous instead of highlighted at every step. And as his journey progresses, the idea of belonging becomes less about finding a place and more about understanding connection, because earlier he was searching for where he fit, but now he carries that sense of belonging within himself, and this internal shift adds depth to his character without needing additional conflict. And the narrative stays focused on progression rather than escalation. which keeps the tone steady and consistent. And from a viewing perspective, this phase feels calm but still engaging because it shows movement through development instead of action, and the pacing remains balanced, giving space for the journey to be understood without slowing it down. And what stands out is that the film does not try to create a final dramatic moment to define everything. Instead, it allows the entire journey to serve as that defining element, showing how each step builds into the next. And this approach keeps the story connected from beginning to end, making it feel complete without forcing an ending. And as it continues in this direction, it reinforces the idea that real change is ongoing, shaped by consistent effort, support, and the ability to move forward while carrying everything that has been learned along the way. Michael's journey at this stage moves into a space where survival is no longer the goal. Maintaining stability becomes the real challenge. And this shift is important because earlier he was just responding to situations. Now he is responsible for holding his position and continuing forward without losing what he has built. The film shows this transition in a very controlled way, without using heavy dialogue or dramatic moments. Instead, it focuses on how his behavior changes. He becomes more aware, more observant, and more deliberate in how he reacts to things. And this makes his growth feel real because it is not loud or exaggerated, it is quiet but clear. The influence of the Tui family is still present, but now it exists in the way he thinks and makes decisions rather than in direct guidance. And this makes their impact feel deeper because it has become part of him instead of something external. One of the most noticeable changes is how Michael carries himself in different environments. Earlier, he felt out of place almost everywhere, but now he moves with a sense of belonging that does not depend on where he is. This is a major transformation because it shows that his identity is no longer uncertain. He understands who he is, and that understanding shapes everything he does. The film does not try to create new conflict at this point, and that choice works because it allows the focus to stay on progression instead of distraction. Every scene moves forward naturally, showing how he handles responsibility, how he maintains focus, and how he continues to grow without needing a push from outside. The pacing stays steady, and there is no rush to reach a dramatic endpoint, which makes the journey feel more complete because it is not forced into a single moment. Another important aspect here is how success is presented. It is not shown as a final achievement that solves everything. It is shown as a responsibility that requires consistency, and Michael's actions reflect that understanding. He is no longer just reacting to opportunities, he is managing them, and that difference defines this phase of his story. The environment around him also reflects this stability. It no longer feels unpredictable or overwhelming. It feels like a space he can move through with control and awareness. This does not mean everything is perfect, but it shows that he is no longer lost within it. The film keeps its tone grounded and avoids unnecessary emotional repetition, which helps maintain a smooth flow from beginning to end. Instead of relying on dramatic peaks, it builds its impact through steady development, and this approach makes the story feel more authentic. By this point, it becomes clear that the film is not about reaching a final destination, it is about showing how a person continues moving forward after finding direction, and that is what gives the story its lasting effect, because it reflects real growth, something that does not stop at one achievement but continues over time. At this point, the story keeps its focus on how Michael handles pressure that comes with expectations rather than hardship, and this is a key shift because earlier pressure came from instability. Now it comes from performance, responsibility, and the need to stay consistent in an environment where people expect results from him. The film shows this without turning it into a dramatic struggle. Instead, it presents it through his routine, his focus, and the way he processes situations calmly rather than reacting emotionally. You can see that he is no longer overwhelmed by attention or opportunity. He understands what is expected from him, and he approaches it with a level of discipline that was not present before. This is where his internal growth becomes more important than external events, because the challenges are no longer about survival or acceptance, they are about maintaining identity under pressure. The influence of the Tui family continues to exist in how he handles these expectations, especially in the way he stays grounded and does not let success change his behavior or perspective. The film keeps this consistent by avoiding sudden personality shifts. He does not become loud or overly confident. He remains quiet, but now there is control behind that silence. Another important detail here is how the narrative avoids making everything perfect. It does not suggest that once he reaches this stage everything becomes easy. Instead, it shows that stability requires effort and awareness, and that effort is something he has to maintain on his own. The environment around him also reflects this shift. It feels structured and demanding, but not threatening, and that difference shows how far he has come from the earlier stages of his life where every environment felt uncertain. The pacing remains steady, and the film continues to move forward through progression rather than dramatic events, which keeps the experience smooth and realistic. The absence of unnecessary conflict allows the focus to stay on his development, and this makes the story feel more personal because it is not distracted by external drama. At the same time, the sense of belonging that he once struggled to find now feels stable, not because of a specific place, but because of the connections he has built and the understanding he has gained about himself. This internal shift is what defines this phase of the story, and the film handles it in a way that feels natural and consistent with everything that came before, allowing the journey to continue without forcing a conclusion. At this stage, the narrative keeps pushing forward by showing how consistency becomes the real measure of growth, because reaching a position is one thing, but holding it over time is what defines real progress. And this is where Michael's journey gains another layer without needing new conflict or dramatic tension. The film focuses on how he handles routine, discipline, and repetition, not in a boring way but in a way that shows how structure replaces chaos in his life. And this contrast is important because earlier his life had no clear direction, but now every action has purpose. You can see that he does not rely on motivation alone. He operates through understanding. He knows what he needs to do, and he does it without needing external push, and this reflects maturity more than talent. The influence of the Toohey family is still visible, but now it exists in how he carries himself rather than in direct interaction, and this makes their role feel complete because they are no longer shaping his actions. They have shaped his mindset. Another key detail is how the film keeps his personality consistent. He does not transform into a completely different person. He remains quiet and composed, but now that quietness carries confidence instead of uncertainty, and that subtle shift makes his character feel authentic. The environment around him continues to reflect this stability. It feels structured and predictable, not in a negative way but in a way that shows control, and this is something he did not have earlier in his life. The pacing remains steady and controlled, and the film avoids creating unnecessary peaks or sudden emotional shifts. Instead, it builds its impact through continuity, allowing each moment to connect with the next. The absence of major conflict does not reduce engagement, because the focus is now on development rather than struggle, and this keeps the narrative grounded. Another important aspect here is how responsibility is shown. It is not presented as pressure that breaks him. It is shown as something he carries naturally because he understands its importance, and this reflects how far he has come from the beginning where even small decisions felt uncertain. The sense of belonging that once felt distant is now fully internal. He does not need validation from others to feel secure, and this makes his journey feel complete without needing a dramatic conclusion. The film continues in this direction, showing that growth is not a single moment but an ongoing process, and that process is what keeps the story active and meaningful. At this point, the narrative keeps moving by focusing on how Michael handles long-term expectations, and this adds another layer because now the challenge is not reaching a goal or proving himself once. It is about showing that he can maintain the same level of focus and discipline over time without losing direction, and the film presents this in a calm and steady way instead of turning it into a dramatic struggle. His actions become more consistent, his decisions more controlled, and you can clearly see that he is no longer reacting to situations. He is managing them, which shows a complete shift from where he started. The influence of the Toohey family remains present, but in a more subtle form. It exists in his behavior, in the way he stays grounded, and in how he approaches both success and pressure without letting either change who he is. This is important because it shows that their impact was not temporary, it became part of his identity. The film also avoids creating artificial tension at this stage. It does not introduce unnecessary conflict just to keep things intense. Instead, it relies on progression, and that makes the story feel more realistic because not every phase of life is driven by major events. Sometimes it is about maintaining what you have built. The environment around him reflects this stability. It feels structured and controlled. And unlike earlier parts of the story, it does not overwhelm him. Instead, he moves through it with awareness and purpose. Another important detail is how his quiet nature remains intact, but now it carries strength rather than uncertainty, and this consistency in his character makes the transformation feel believable. The pacing continues to stay balanced, with no sudden jumps or slowdowns, allowing the journey to unfold naturally. The absence of high-intensity moments does not reduce engagement, because the focus is now on depth rather than action, and this shift keeps the narrative grounded. The sense of belonging that once felt uncertain is now fully established, not tied to a specific place but to the understanding he has developed about himself and the connections he values. This internal stability becomes the strongest part of his journey, and the film builds on it without needing to highlight it repeatedly. As everything continues forward, the story reinforces the idea that growth is not about reaching a final point, it is about sustaining progress. And this is what defines this phase of Michael's life, making the narrative feel complete while still moving ahead without forcing a traditional ending. From here, the story leans into how Michael operates when structure becomes normal instead of new, and this adds depth because the challenge shifts from adapting to a system to improving within it, and that requires a different kind of focus that is less visible but more demanding. His daily routine becomes the backbone of his progress, and the film shows how repetition builds confidence, how small adjustments in technique and awareness turn into reliable performance, and how consistency replaces uncertainty as the driving force behind his growth. He does not look for shortcuts or quick wins, he follows process. And that process reflects maturity because it shows he understands that results come from discipline rather than moments of effort. The environment around him supports this shift, not by making things easy but by setting clear expectations that he now knows how to meet. And this creates a space where progress is measured through stability and improvement instead of sudden breakthroughs. The connection with the Tui family continues to shape his approach even when they are not physically present. And you can see that in the way he handles pressure, in how he stays grounded after success, and in how he keeps his focus when situations become demanding, and this indicates that their influence has become internal rather than external guidance. Another layer that becomes clear here is how Michael starts to understand the importance of decision-making beyond immediate outcomes, because earlier he acted based on survival or instruction, but now he evaluates situations with awareness of long-term impact, and this change defines his independence more than any single achievement. The film keeps the tone controlled and avoids turning this phase into a dramatic sequence, and that choice works because it reflects reality, where growth often happens through steady effort rather than visible conflict. His quiet personality remains consistent, but now it carries a sense of certainty that was missing before, and that subtle shift keeps his character authentic. The pacing stays even, allowing the viewer to absorb the progression without feeling rushed or slowed down. And this helps maintain engagement through continuity rather than intensity. What stands out is that the story does not try to present a final test or a defining obstacle to prove his growth. Instead, it shows that his growth is already proven through how he carries himself in every situation, and that approach keeps the narrative grounded. The idea of belonging is no longer something he searches for, it becomes something he lives with, expressed through his actions, his choices, and his consistency. This stage of the journey highlights how real progress is sustained through discipline, awareness, and the ability to move forward without losing direction. And by keeping the focus on these elements, the film continues to feel connected and meaningful without relying on repetition or forced escalation. At this stage, the film places more weight on how Michael handles visibility and attention, and this adds another layer because earlier he was overlooked and unnoticed, but now he operates in an environment where people watch him, expect from him, and judge his performance. And this shift could easily change a person's mindset, but the film shows that he remains controlled and grounded, which highlights how strong his internal development has become. He does not chase attention or react to it. He stays focused on what he needs to do, and that approach reflects discipline rather than insecurity. His performance is no longer driven by proving himself to others, it is driven by maintaining a standard that he has set for himself, and this difference defines the maturity of his character at this point. The structure around him becomes more demanding, with clear expectations and constant evaluation, but instead of being overwhelmed, he adapts to it. And this shows that he is no longer shaped by his environment. He functions within it with awareness and control. The influence of the Tui family is still present in how he handles these situations, especially in the way he stays composed and does not let pressure change his behavior, and this reinforces the idea that their impact is permanent rather than temporary. Another important detail is how the film continues to avoid dramatic conflict. It does not introduce unnecessary tension to keep the story active. Instead, it relies on progression, showing how he handles responsibility step by step, and this keeps the narrative realistic and consistent. His quiet personality remains a key part of his identity, but now it represents confidence instead of hesitation, and that shift is subtle but significant. The pacing continues to stay balanced, allowing the story to move forward naturally without forcing intensity or slowing down unnecessarily, and this creates a smooth viewing experience. The sense of belonging that once felt distant is now fully integrated into his character, and it no longer depends on external validation or specific situations. It exists in how he sees himself and how he connects with others. The film builds on this idea without repeating earlier moments, allowing the journey to feel complete without being repetitive. As everything continues to progress, the focus remains on maintaining growth through consistency, awareness, and discipline, and this approach keeps the story engaging without needing to change its direction, reinforcing the idea that real transformation is not about a single turning point but about how that change is sustained over time. Now the film shifts its attention to how Michael manages responsibility that extends beyond his own performance, and this adds depth because he is no longer just accountable for himself. He becomes part of a larger system where his actions affect others around him, and this changes how he approaches everything he does. You can see that his awareness increases. He understands positioning, timing, and decision-making to protect has now developed into a structured and reliable role. He does not act on impulse anymore. He acts with purpose, and that purpose is built on understanding rather than instruction. The film presents this without over-explaining it, showing it through his movement, his focus, and the way he reacts under pressure, and this keeps the progression natural. The environment around him becomes more demanding, but instead of feeling restrictive, it feels like a space where he can apply everything he has learned, and this shows that he has adapted fully to the system rather than just fitting into it temporarily. The influence of the Tui family continues to appear in subtle ways, especially in how he stays grounded and does not lose control when situations become intense, and this consistency highlights how deeply that support has shaped him. Another important aspect is how the film keeps his personality intact. He remains quiet and composed, but now that calmness carries authority, and that makes his presence stronger without needing to change who he is. The narrative avoids creating artificial drama and instead focuses on progression through responsibility, and this approach keeps the story realistic because it reflects how real growth works over time. The pacing stays steady, allowing each development to connect smoothly with the next, and this continuity keeps the viewer engaged without relying on sudden shifts. The idea of belonging continues to evolve, no longer tied to a single place or group, but to the role he plays and the connections he maintains, and this internal stability becomes the strongest part of his character. As the story continues in this direction, it reinforces that true growth is not just about reaching a level of success, it is about sustaining that level while understanding the impact of your actions, and this is what defines this phase of Michael's journey, keeping the narrative consistent, grounded, and meaningful without repetition or forced intensity. At this point, the narrative moves into a more refined phase where Michael is not just maintaining his position but improving within it, and this creates a sense that growth has shifted from basic development to controlled progression, where every action carries intention and awareness. You can clearly see that his approach is no longer based on reacting to situations but on understanding them before they fully unfold, and this adds a level of maturity that was completely absent at the beginning of the film. His movements, both on and off the field, feel more calculated, not in a robotic way but in a way that shows he has developed a clear understanding of his role and the impact of his decisions. This is important because it highlights that growth is not only about gaining opportunities but also about knowing how to handle them without losing focus. The film presents this without forcing dramatic emphasis, allowing the progression to be visible through behavior rather than explanation, and this keeps the tone consistent and grounded. The environment around him now operates at a higher level of expectation, where performance is constantly evaluated and consistency becomes the key factor that defines success. And instead of being overwhelmed by this pressure, Michael adapts to it in a way that shows control and discipline. He does not chase recognition or react emotionally to attention. Instead, he stays focused on his responsibilities, and this reflects a mindset that has been built over time rather than something that appeared suddenly. The influence of the Tui family remains deeply embedded in how he handles these situations, especially in the way he stays grounded and does not let external factors change his behavior, and this reinforces the idea that their impact has become part of his foundation. It is not something he depends on anymore, it is something he carries with him naturally, and this makes his independence feel real and complete. Another important aspect that stands out in this phase is how Michael begins to understand the broader structure he is part of, and this goes beyond his individual performance. He starts recognizing patterns, adjusting to different situations, and aligning his act. He is no longer just participating, he is contributing in a way that affects the entire system, and this level of understanding reflects a deeper form of growth that goes beyond skill. The film shows this progression through subtle details rather than direct explanation, which keeps the experience engaging without making it feel repetitive. The pacing remains steady and controlled, avoiding unnecessary spikes in intensity, and this works in favor of the narrative because it allows the focus to stay on progression rather than distraction. There is no sudden conflict introduced to test him again, and that choice keeps the story realistic because not every phase of growth requires a major obstacle. Instead, the challenge becomes maintaining consistency over time, and this is something the film highlights effectively through his behavior and decision-making. His quiet personality remains unchanged, but now it carries a strong sense of confidence and clarity, and this subtle transformation feels more powerful than any dramatic shift would. The idea of belonging also reaches a more complete form here, because it is no longer something he is trying to find or prove, it becomes something that exists naturally in how he operates and how he connects with others. He does not need validation to feel secure, and this internal stability defines his character at this stage. As everything continues to move forward, the film reinforces that real growth is not defined by a single achievement or turning point. It is defined by the ability to maintain progress, adapt when needed, and continue moving forward without losing direction, and this is what gives this phase of the story its depth and lasting impact. From here, the film deepens the idea of control by showing how Michael begins refining his performance in smaller, more detailed ways, and this adds another level because now the focus is not just on doing things right but on doing them better with each step. And that kind of improvement requires awareness that goes beyond basic understanding. He starts recognizing mistakes quickly, adjusting without hesitation, and maintaining focus even when situations become fast or demanding, and this reflects a level of discipline that has developed gradually throughout the story. His actions feel more precise, his decisions more stable, and this consistency shows that he is no longer learning how to fit into the system, he is learning how to excel within it. The film handles this progression without drawing too much attention to it, allowing it to be visible through his behavior rather than explained through dialogue, and this keeps the narrative smooth and natural. The environment continues to challenge him, but in a different way than before, because now the pressure is not about proving himself, it is about maintaining a standard that others expect from him, and this kind of pressure can easily create instability, but instead he remains steady, showing that his growth is not temporary. He does not let success change his mindset, and he does not allow expectations to overwhelm him, and this balance reflects maturity more than any single achievement could. The influence of the Tui family remains present in how he handles these situations, especially in his ability to stay grounded and focused, and this reinforces the idea that their role has become part of his internal structure rather than something external. Another important element in this phase is how Michael begins to understand timing and awareness at a deeper level, not just reacting to what is happening but anticipating what might happen next. And this shift makes his performance more effective because it reduces hesitation and increases control. He becomes more connected to the flow of the game, understanding not only his role but how his role fits into the larger system. And this creates a sense of alignment that was not present earlier. The film presents this development in a subtle way, focusing on continuity rather than dramatic highlights, and this keeps the experience realistic and engaging. The pacing remains consistent, allowing the story to progress without unnecessary interruptions, and this steady movement helps maintain focus on the character rather than external events. There is no need for a new conflict because the challenge at this stage is internal. It is about maintaining discipline, improving performance, and staying consistent over time, and this approach keeps the narrative grounded. His personality remains unchanged in its core. He is still quiet and composed, but now that calmness carries authority and confidence, and this subtle difference defines how far he has come. The idea of belonging continues to exist as a natural part of his identity, no longer something that needs to be proven or questioned, and this internal stability allows him to move forward without distraction. As the story continues in this direction, it reinforces that growth is not about reaching a point where everything becomes easy. It is about developing the ability to handle complexity without losing focus. And this is what gives this phase of Michael's journey its depth, showing that true progress is built through consistency, awareness, and the ability to keep improving without needing constant validation. At this point, the film shifts attention to how Michael manages consistency over extended periods. And this adds another layer because short-term performance can come from effort, but long-term stability comes from discipline and control, and that is what the narrative focuses on here. His routine becomes more structured, not in a restrictive way but in a way that supports growth, and you can see that he follows this structure with clarity, not because he is told to, but because he understands its value. This is where his mindset becomes the most important factor, because he is no longer relying on guidance or motivation from others. He operates with self-awareness, and that awareness allows him to maintain focus even when situations become repetitive or demanding. The film presents this progression through small but meaningful details, showing how he stays engaged, how he corrects himself, and how he keeps moving forward without losing direction, and this makes his development feel real rather than exaggerated. The environment around him continues to operate at a high level of expectation, where consistency is constantly tested, and instead of reacting to that pressure, he adapts to it, treating it as part of the process rather than a challenge that needs to be overcome, and this reflects maturity. He does not chase results, he focuses on execution, and that shift in approach defines his growth at this stage. The influence of the Tui family remains visible in how he stays grounded, especially in the way he handles both success and pressure without letting either change his behavior, and this shows that their impact has become part of his internal structure. It is not something he actively thinks about, it is something that naturally shapes his actions. Another important aspect here is how Michael begins to operate with a deeper understanding of responsibility, not just toward himself but toward the role he plays within a larger system, and this expands his awareness beyond individual performance. He starts recognizing how his actions affect others, how timing and positioning influence outcomes, and how consistency contributes to stability across the entire system, and this shift reflects a higher level of growth. The film shows this in a controlled way, without turning it into a dramatic highlight, and this keeps the narrative grounded and focused. The pacing remains steady and balanced, allowing the story to move forward without unnecessary spikes or slowdowns, and this consistency supports the overall tone of the film. There is no introduction of new conflict because the focus remains on progression, and this choice keeps the story realistic, as growth at this stage is about maintaining and improving rather than overcoming sudden obstacles. His quiet personality continues to define him, but now it carries confidence, awareness, and control, and this subtle transformation feels authentic. The idea of belonging is now fully integrated into his character, no longer dependent on external validation or specific situations, and this internal stability allows him to move forward with clarity. As the narrative continues, it reinforces that true growth is sustained through discipline, awareness, and consistency over time, And this phase of the story highlights how maintaining progress becomes more important than achieving it, giving the journey a sense of completeness without forcing a dramatic conclusion. At this stage, the film moves deeper into how Michael sustains performance over time when routine becomes constant and expectations do not drop. And this is where the narrative gains more depth because the challenge is no longer about reaching a level but about holding it without losing focus or direction. And that requires a mindset built on discipline rather than emotion. You can see that his actions are now driven by awareness. He understands what needs to be done and he follows through without hesitation, and this consistency reflects growth that has settled into his character rather than something that appears only in key moments. His routine becomes more refined, each action connects to the next with purpose, and even when situations repeat, he does not lose engagement, which shows that he is not relying on external motivation. He operates through understanding and control. The environment around him continues to test this stability, not through sudden conflict but through constant demand, where every performance is expected to meet a standard, and this type of pressure can expose weakness over time, but instead he adapts to it, showing that his growth is not temporary. He does not react to pressure in a visible way. He absorbs it and continues forward, and this approach reflects maturity because it shows control over both action and emotion. The influence of the Tui family remains deeply embedded in how he handles this phase, especially in the way he stays grounded, does not seek attention, and maintains focus regardless of what is happening around him, and this reinforces that their impact has become part of his identity. It is not something he actively thinks about, it is something that shapes how he moves and how he decides. Another important layer in this phase is how Michael begins to operate with a broader understanding of his role. He is no longer focused only on individual performance. He recognizes how his actions connect to others, how timing affects outcomes, and how consistency supports the entire structure he is part of, and this awareness reflects a deeper level of growth. The film presents this through subtle progression rather than explanation, showing it in how he reacts, how he adjusts, and how he maintains alignment with everything around him. His personality remains consistent, he is still quiet and composed, but now that calmness carries authority and confidence. And this subtle shift is more powerful than a dramatic change would be because it feels natural and earned. The pacing continues to stay steady, allowing the story to unfold without unnecessary intensity, and this works because the focus is on continuity rather than conflict, showing how growth is maintained rather than tested through sudden obstacles. The environment reflects this stability. It no longer feels unpredictable or overwhelming. Instead, it feels structured and controlled, and this shows that he has adapted fully rather than just adjusted temporarily. The idea of belonging is now completely internal. It does not depend on where he is or who is around him. It exists in how he sees himself and how he carries that understanding into every situation, and this internal stability becomes the strongest part of his character. The film continues to build on this idea without repeating earlier moments, allowing progression to feel fresh even though the direction remains consistent. Another key detail is how responsibility becomes natural for him. It is no longer something he has to think about, it is something he carries automatically, and this shows that his growth has reached a point where it no longer needs reinforcement, it exists as part of his behavior. He understands the importance of maintaining standards, not because others expect it, but because he expects it from himself, and this shift defines true independence. The narrative avoids introducing unnecessary complications at this stage, and this choice keeps the story grounded, because real growth often happens without dramatic events. It develops through repetition, awareness, and consistency, and the film captures that in a way that feels realistic. As everything continues forward, the focus remains on how Michael sustains progress, improves within structure, and maintains control over his actions without losing direction, and this creates a sense of completeness that does not rely on a final dramatic moment. Instead, it builds through continuous development. The story shows that reaching a point of stability is not the end, it is the beginning of a phase where that stability must be maintained and improved over time, and this is what gives this part of the journey its depth, because it reflects real growth, something that does not stop at one achievement but continues through consistent effort, awareness, and the ability to move forward without losing the foundation that was built earlier. At this point, the narrative moves into how Michael handles refinement at a higher level where improvement is measured in small adjustments rather than visible leaps. And this adds depth because the difference between being capable and being reliable becomes clear through how consistently he performs under varying conditions. And the film shows that his progress is now built on detail, timing, and awareness rather than raw effort alone. He begins to read situations earlier, position himself with more precision, and make decisions that reduce risk while increasing effectiveness. And this level of control reflects a mindset that has fully developed over time. His actions are no longer reactive, they are prepared, and that preparation allows him to maintain stability even when conditions change, which shows that his growth is not dependent on a specific environment. The structure around him remains demanding, with expectations that do not drop, but he treats that demand as normal rather than pressure, and this shift defines how far he has come because earlier any form of expectation created uncertainty, while now it creates focus. The influence of the Tui family continues to exist in how he keeps his behavior grounded, avoids unnecessary attention, and maintains clarity in his decisions, and this reinforces that their role has become part of his internal framework. He does not need reminders or guidance, he carries those lessons in how he operates every day, and that makes his independence feel complete. Another important element in this phase is how Michael begins to connect consistency with responsibility at a deeper level, understanding that maintaining a standard is not just about personal performance but about contributing to the stability of the entire system he is part of, and this awareness expands his role beyond individual success. He starts anticipating how his actions affect others, aligning himself with the flow of the team, and making adjustments that support overall balance. And this shows a level of maturity that goes beyond skill. The film presents this progression through continuity rather than emphasis, allowing it to feel natural and integrated into the story without repeating earlier points. His personality remains steady, he does not change who he is, but the confidence behind his quiet nature becomes more defined, and this subtle evolution keeps his character authentic. The pacing continues to stay controlled, avoiding unnecessary intensity, and this allows the focus to remain on development rather than distraction. The environment reflects this stability. It no longer feels like something he has to overcome, it becomes a space where he operates with clarity and purpose, and this shows that he has fully adapted rather than simply adjusted. The idea of belonging is now fully embedded in his identity. It does not depend on validation or circumstance. It exists in how he understands himself and his place within a larger structure, and this internal stability allows him to move forward without hesitation. The film continues in this direction, reinforcing that true growth is defined by consistency, awareness, and the ability to improve without losing control, and this approach keeps the narrative strong without needing dramatic shifts. As everything progresses, the story highlights that development at this level is not about reaching a new stage, it is about maintaining and refining what has already been built, and this gives the journey a sense of completion while still allowing it to continue forward in a natural and grounded way. Now the narrative moves into a phase where precision and control define everything Michael does, and this creates a deeper sense of progression because the difference between being good and being dependable starts to show clearly through how he handles complex situations without losing focus. And this is where the film highlights a more advanced level of growth that is not built on big moments but on consistency across many small ones. His awareness sharpens, he processes information faster, reacts with better timing, and positions himself in ways that reduce pressure before it even builds. And this shift shows that he is no longer just part of the system. He understands how to function inside it with efficiency and purpose. The structure around him remains demanding, with constant evaluation and expectation, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, he operates within it with stability, and this reflects a mindset that has been shaped through discipline rather than emotion. He does not let performance define his identity, he lets his identity define how he performs, and that distinction is what keeps him grounded even when situations become intense. The influence of the Tui family continues to be visible in how he maintains balance, stays focused, and avoids unnecessary distractions, and this reinforces that their support has become part of his internal structure rather than something external. He does not need reminders, he carries those lessons naturally in how he approaches everything. Another important element here is how Michael develops a stronger understanding of rhythm and flow, not just reacting to isolated moments but aligning himself with the pace of everything happening around him, and this allows him to maintain control even when the environment becomes unpredictable. He begins to anticipate movement, adjust positioning with precision, and contribute in ways that strengthen the overall system rather than just focusing on his individual role, and this level of awareness reflects a deeper stage of growth. The film presents this progression through continuity rather than emphasis, allowing it to feel natural and integrated into the narrative without repetition. His personality remains consistent, quiet, and composed, but now that calmness carries authority and certainty, and this subtle transformation feels more powerful because it is built gradually. The pacing stays steady and controlled, avoiding unnecessary intensity, and this helps maintain focus on development rather than distraction. The environment reflects this stability. It becomes a space where he operates with clarity instead of uncertainty, and this shows that he has fully adapted. The idea of belonging is no longer something that needs to be proven. It exists in how he moves, how he connects, and how he maintains his position without hesitation. As the story continues in this direction, it reinforces that growth at this level is about refinement, awareness, and the ability to maintain control under any condition, and this gives the narrative depth without needing dramatic shifts. The journey continues to feel complete while still progressing, showing that real development does not stop at success. It continues through consistency, discipline, and the ability to keep improving without losing the foundation that was built earlier. At this stage, the film shifts toward how Michael sustains precision under changing conditions. And this adds another level because stability is easy when everything is predictable, but real control shows when situations vary and require quick adjustment without losing structure. And this is where his development becomes more evident through how he handles variation rather than repetition. He begins to process multiple factors at once, reading movement, timing his responses, and positioning himself in ways that reduce pressure before it builds. And this shows that his awareness has expanded beyond basic understanding into something more refined and controlled. His actions feel smooth and connected, each decision leading naturally into the next. And this continuity reflects a level of discipline that has been built over time. The environment around him continues to demand consistency, but now those demands come with variation, and instead of disrupting his rhythm, they become part of it, showing that he has adapted not just to a system but to the unpredictability within it. The influence of the Tui family remains present in how he stays grounded and focused, especially in how he avoids unnecessary reaction and maintains clarity even when situations become complex, and this reinforces that their impact is part of his internal structure. He does not rely on external direction anymore. He operates through understanding, and that independence defines this phase of his journey. Another important element here is how Michael begins to recognize patterns within variation, allowing him to anticipate outcomes rather than react to them. And this shift makes his performance more efficient because it reduces hesitation and increases control. He aligns his actions with the flow of everything around him, contributing in a way that supports the entire system rather than just fulfilling his role, and this level of awareness reflects maturity beyond skill. The film presents this progression without exaggeration, keeping the tone grounded and consistent, and this allows the development to feel natural instead of forced. His personality remains steady, quiet, and composed, but now that calmness carries confidence and authority, and this subtle evolution keeps his character authentic. The pacing continues to stay balanced, avoiding unnecessary intensity, and this helps maintain focus on progression rather than conflict. The environment reflects this stability. It no longer feels unpredictable or overwhelming. It becomes a space where he operates with clarity and control, and this shows that he has fully adapted. The idea of belonging is now completely internal. It exists in how he understands himself and how he connects with others without needing validation, and this internal stability allows him to move forward without hesitation. As the narrative continues, it reinforces that true growth at this level is about maintaining control under changing conditions, improving through awareness, and continuing to develop without losing consistency, and this gives the story depth while keeping it grounded and connected from beginning to end. At this stage, the film focuses on how Michael manages control when demands increase without warning, and this adds another layer because growth at this level is not tested by predictable challenges but by sudden shifts that require immediate clarity, and this is where his development becomes more visible through how he maintains structure under pressure rather than how he performs when everything is stable. His reactions become faster but remain controlled. He does not rush or lose balance. Instead, he adjusts with purpose, and this shows that his awareness has reached a point where he can handle complexity without hesitation. He reads situations earlier, positions himself more effectively, and makes decisions that prevent problems instead of reacting to them, and this reflects a mindset that is built on understanding rather than instinct alone. The environment continues to place constant demand on him, but those demands no longer feel overwhelming because he has developed the ability to stay focused regardless of how conditions change, and this is where his consistency proves its strength. The influence of the Tui family remains present in the way he maintains composure, avoids distraction, and keeps his attention on what matters, and this reinforces that their impact has become part of his internal behavior rather than something external. He does not need guidance anymore. He operates with clarity that comes from everything he has learned, and that independence defines this phase of his journey. Another thing, not just reacting to what is happening but controlling when and how he responds, and this allows him to stay ahead of situations rather than being pulled into them. He becomes more connected to the flow around him, understanding how each action influences the next, and this alignment strengthens his role within the system he is part of. The film presents this progression in a steady and grounded way, avoiding unnecessary emphasis, and this keeps the narrative smooth and consistent. His personality remains unchanged at its core. He is still quiet and composed, but now that calmness carries confidence, control, and authority, and this subtle shift makes his transformation feel real. The pacing continues to remain balanced, allowing development to unfold naturally without forced intensity, and this helps maintain engagement through progression rather than conflict. The environment reflects this stability. It becomes a space where he operates with awareness instead of uncertainty, and this shows that he has fully adapted to the demands placed on him. The idea of belonging is now completely internal, no longer tied to external validation or specific situations, and this internal stability allows him to move forward without hesitation. As the story continues, it reinforces that growth at this level is about maintaining control under increasing demand, refining awareness, and continuing to improve without losing consistency, and this approach gives the narrative depth while keeping it grounded and connected throughout. Now the film moves into a phase where Michael's control begins to feel effortless, and this is important because it shows that everything he learned earlier has become part of his natural behavior rather than something he has to think about, and this shift creates a different kind of progression where the focus is no longer on learning or adjusting but on maintaining a standard without visible strain. His movements become smoother, his decisions more immediate, and his reactions more precise. And this level of efficiency reflects a deep understanding of his role and the environment around him. He no longer hesitates or overthinks. He processes situations quickly and responds with clarity, and this shows that his growth has reached a point where it operates automatically. The environment continues to present challenges, but now those challenges do not disrupt his rhythm, they become part of it, and this indicates that he has fully adapted rather than just improved. The influence of the Tui family remains present in how he stays grounded, focused, and consistent, and this reinforces that their impact has become part of his internal structure. He does not need reminders or external support to stay on track. He carries those lessons within him, and this makes his independence feel complete. Another important aspect in this phase is how Michael begins to maintain control across different situations without losing consistency, and this shows that his development is not limited to one environment but extends across varying conditions. He adjusts without hesitation, aligns himself with changes, and continues to operate with the same level of awareness regardless of what is happening around him, and this reflects a level of maturity that goes beyond basic growth. The film presents this progression in a steady and controlled way, avoiding unnecessary emphasis, and this keeps the narrative smooth and realistic. His personality remains consistent, quiet, and composed, but now that calmness carries authority and confidence, and this subtle transformation feels natural because it has been built gradually. The pacing continues to stay balanced, allowing the story to move forward without forcing intensity, and this helps maintain engagement through continuity rather than conflict. The environment reflects this stability. It becomes a space where he operates with clarity and control, and this shows that he is no longer shaped by his surroundings, he functions within them with purpose. The idea of belonging is now fully integrated into his identity. It no longer depends on external validation or specific circumstances. It exists in how he understands himself and how he connects with others, and this internal stability becomes the strongest part of his character. As the narrative continues in this direction, it reinforces that true growth is defined by the ability to maintain control, adapt to change, and continue improving without losing consistency, and this gives the story depth while keeping it grounded and connected from beginning. At this point, the film turns its attention to endurance, not just physical endurance but mental consistency across long stretches where nothing dramatic happens and yet everything still demands focus. And this adds a strong layer because it shows how growth is tested when there are no clear peaks or turning points to rely on, only routine, repetition, and expectation that never drops. Michael's behavior in this phase becomes even more controlled. He does not drift, he does not lose attention, and he does not allow small mistakes to build into larger problems. Instead, he corrects quickly and keeps moving, and this reflects a mindset that is stable under pressure even when that pressure is not visible. His understanding of timing and positioning continues to sharpen, not in a way that draws attention but in a way that improves efficiency. And this kind of improvement is important because it shows that he is not just maintaining a level, he is quietly raising it. The environment remains demanding, but now it feels like a space where consistency is the expectation rather than a challenge. And this shows that he has reached a point where stability is normal for him. The influence of the Tui family continues to exist in how he keeps his composure, avoids distraction, and maintains focus regardless of what is happening around him, and this reinforces that their impact is part of his internal structure. He does not rely on external validation or encouragement. He operates with self-awareness, and that independence defines this phase of his journey. Another important element here is how Michael begins to handle pressure that builds over time rather than appearing suddenly, and this type of pressure can affect performance if not managed properly, but instead he absorbs it, keeps his rhythm, and continues forward without losing clarity, and this shows a deeper level of control. The film presents this progression in a grounded and consistent way, avoiding unnecessary emphasis, and this keeps the narrative smooth and realistic. His personality remains unchanged at its core. He is still quiet and composed, but now that calmness carries strength, authority, and certainty, and this subtle shift makes his development feel complete. The pacing continues to stay balanced, allowing the story to unfold naturally without forced intensity, and this helps maintain engagement through steady progression. The environment reflects this stability. It becomes a space where he operates with confidence rather than uncertainty, and this shows that he has fully adapted to the demands placed on him. The idea of belonging is now completely internal. It exists in how he understands himself and how he functions within a larger structure, and this internal stability allows him to move forward without hesitation. As the narrative continues, it reinforces that true growth is defined by endurance, consistency, and the ability to maintain focus over time, and this gives the story depth while keeping it grounded and connected without repetition or unnecessary escalation. At this point, the film emphasizes how Michael maintains clarity when the pace around him increases, and this creates another level of depth because situations now demand faster decisions without reducing accuracy, and that balance is what defines advanced control. His reactions become sharper, but they do not lose structure. He still operates with awareness and purpose, and this shows that his growth is stable even when conditions become intense. He begins to process multiple elements at once, reading movement, adjusting positioning, and responding in a way that prevents pressure from building, and this indicates that he is not just reacting anymore, he is managing situations before they fully develop. The environment continues to push for consistency, but now that consistency must exist under higher speed and demand, and instead of breaking his rhythm, it strengthens it, showing that he has adapted beyond basic expectations. The influence of the Tui family remains visible in how he stays grounded, avoids unnecessary reaction, and keeps his focus aligned with what matters, and this reinforces that their impact is part of his internal behavior. He no longer needs external direction. He operates with clarity that comes from everything he has experienced, and that independence defines this phase. Another important element here is how Michael begins to control not only his own actions but how those actions influence the flow around him. And this shows that his role has expanded beyond individual performance into something more connected. He aligns himself with the pace of the environment, supports the system he is part of, and makes decisions that contribute to overall balance. And this reflects a deeper level of awareness. The film presents this progression without exaggeration, allowing it to feel natural and continuous, and this keeps the narrative grounded. His personality remains consistent, quiet, and composed, but now that calmness carries authority and confidence, and this subtle transformation continues to define his character. The pacing stays steady, avoiding unnecessary intensity, and this allows the focus to remain on progression rather than conflict. The environment reflects this stability. It becomes a space where he operates with control and precision, and this shows that he has fully adapted to increasing demands. The idea of belonging remains internal, no longer dependent on validation or external factors, and this internal stability allows him to move forward with confidence. As the story continues in this direction, it reinforces that true growth at this level is about maintaining clarity under speed, adapting without losing structure, and continuing to improve while staying consistent, and this keeps the narrative strong, connected, and meaningful without repetition. At this stage, the film leans into how Michael sustains clarity when fatigue begins to build, and this adds depth because pressure is not always sudden. Sometimes it develops gradually and tests focus over time, and this is where his discipline becomes more visible through how he maintains structure even when energy drops. His movements stay controlled, his decisions remain steady, and he avoids the small lapses that can turn into larger mistakes. And this shows that his growth is not dependent on ideal conditions. He manages pace, balances effort, and keeps his attention on the task instead of reacting to discomfort, and this reflects a mindset that has learned to operate through consistency rather than bursts of effort. The environment continues to demand performance, but now the challenge comes from duration rather than intensity, and instead of losing rhythm he adapts, showing that his control extends across longer stretches without breaking. The influence of the Tui family remains present in how he stays grounded and composed, especially in moments where distraction or frustration could appear, and this reinforces that their impact has become part of how he manages himself internally. He does not rely on external encouragement, he maintains his own standards, and that independence defines this phase. Another important element here is how Michael begins to simplify complex situations, focusing on what matters and removing unnecessary reactions, and this allows him to stay efficient even when conditions become demanding. He aligns his actions with purpose, avoids wasted movement, and keeps his responses clear, and this level of control shows a deeper understanding of his role. The film presents this progression through steady continuity, avoiding dramatic emphasis, and this keeps the narrative grounded and realistic. His personality remains unchanged in its core, quiet and composed, but now that calmness carries strength and certainty, and this subtle shift continues to define his transformation. The pacing remains balanced, allowing the story to move forward without forced intensity, and this maintains engagement through progression. The environment reflects this stability. It becomes a space where he operates with endurance and control rather than uncertainty, and this shows that he has fully adapted. The idea of belonging remains internal. It exists in how he understands himself and how he carries that understanding into every situation, and this internal stability allows him to continue forward without hesitation. As the narrative continues, it reinforces that growth at this level is defined by endurance, focus, and the ability to maintain clarity over time, and this gives the story depth while keeping it connected and consistent without repetition. At this stage, the film turns toward how Michael manages decision-making when situations become crowded and information overlaps. And this adds depth because clarity is harder to maintain when multiple factors compete for attention at the same time. And this is where his development becomes more visible through how he filters what matters and ignores what does not. He begins to prioritize quickly, selecting the right action without hesitation, and this shows that his awareness has moved beyond basic recognition into focused judgment. His movements stay efficient, he does not waste effort, and he positions himself in ways that simplify the situation instead of complicating it, and this reflects a level of control that has been built through consistent experience. The environment around him continues to demand precision, but now that precision must exist in tight spaces where timing and positioning matter more than raw effort, and instead of being overwhelmed he adapts, showing that his understanding is flexible rather than fixed. The influence of the Tui family remains present in how he maintains composure, avoids unnecessary reaction, and keeps his attention on what is important, and this reinforces that their impact has become part of his internal behavior. He does not rely on external instruction anymore, he operates through clarity that comes from everything he has learned, and that independence defines this phase. Another important element here is how Michael begins to create space through his decisions, reducing pressure not just for himself but for the system around him, and this shows that his role has expanded beyond individual performance into something more connected. He aligns his actions with the flow of everything around him, supporting stability instead of reacting to disruption, and this level of awareness reflects maturity beyond skill. The film presents this progression without exaggeration, allowing it to feel natural and continuous, and this keeps the narrative grounded. His personality remains consistent, quiet, and composed, but now that calmness carries authority and confidence, and this subtle transformation continues to define his character. The pacing remains steady, avoiding unnecessary intensity, and this allows the focus to stay on progression rather than conflict. The environment reflects this stability. It becomes a space where he operates with control and awareness, and this shows that he has fully adapted to complexity. The idea of belonging remains internal, no longer dependent on external validation, and this internal stability allows him to move forward with confidence. As the story continues in this direction, it reinforces that true growth at this level is about maintaining clarity in complexity, making efficient decisions, and continuing to improve without losing structure, and this keeps the narrative strong, connected, and meaningful without repetition. Michael reaches a point where his growth stops looking like progress and starts feeling like a natural state. And this shift is important because he is no longer trying to prove anything, he is focused on maintaining what he has built. His body language reflects this change clearly. He is no longer unsure or hesitant, instead he moves with calm control in every situation. The biggest difference you notice here is that he no longer reacts to events as they happen. He begins to anticipate them, understanding what is about to happen before it fully develops and adjusting his position and response accordingly. This level of awareness is critical, and the film shows it in a very natural way without forcing explanation. The environment around him also feels different. It no longer appears unpredictable or overwhelming. It becomes a structured space where he understands his role and operates with confidence. This shift matters because earlier his life was defined by uncertainty, but now he can handle changing situations without losing control. The influence of the Tui family is still present, but now it exists internally, shaping how he thinks, how he reacts, and how he makes decisions, rather than appearing as direct guidance. He no longer looks for validation, he understands his purpose and acts with clarity, and this internal confidence becomes one of his strongest qualities. Another important aspect in this phase is how Michael begins to function as part of a larger system rather than just as an individual. His performance connects with others, his actions affect the outcome for the entire group, and he operates with that awareness, which shows maturity. The film avoids introducing unnecessary conflict here, and that works because the focus has shifted from struggle to stability. Each moment flows into the next without sudden disruption, and the pacing remains controlled, allowing the viewer to understand and feel his growth rather than just observe it. His quiet personality remains consistent, but now it carries strength, control, and certainty, and this subtle transformation feels authentic because it has been built gradually. The idea of belonging is no longer something he searches for, it becomes something he carries within himself, and this internal stability defines who he is at this stage. The story continues to move forward through this sense of balance and control, showing that real growth is not about reaching a single moment of success, but about maintaining that success over time without losing direction. Michael now operates in a space where consistency defines his identity more than any single performance, and this creates a deeper sense of progression because the focus shifts from moments of improvement to long-term reliability, and that kind of growth requires control that holds under pressure, time, and expectation all at once. His decision-making becomes sharper, not because he is forcing it, but because he understands what matters and filters out everything unnecessary, and this allows him to act with clarity even when situations become crowded or fast. You can see that he does not rush or hesitate, he finds the right moment and executes with purpose, and that balance reflects a level of maturity that has been built step by step. The environment around him continues to demand performance, but now those demands feel like part of the structure rather than something that creates tension, and this shows that he has fully adapted to operating under expectation without losing control. The influence of the Tui family remains deeply embedded in how he handles these moments, especially in how he stays grounded, avoids distraction, and keeps his focus aligned with what matters, and this reinforces that their support has become part of his internal framework. He does not depend on anyone to guide him anymore, he carries that guidance within himself, and that independence defines this phase of his journey. Another important element here is how Michael begins to manage space and timing in a way that benefits not only his own performance but the entire system around him, and this shows that his awareness has expanded beyond individual focus into something more connected. He aligns his actions with the flow of everything happening around him, contributing to stability rather than reacting to disruption, and this reflects a deeper understanding of his role. The film presents this progression in a smooth and controlled way, avoiding unnecessary emphasis, and this keeps the narrative grounded and realistic. His personality remains unchanged in its core, quiet and composed, but now that calmness carries authority and confidence, and this subtle shift continues to define his transformation. The pacing remains steady, allowing the story to move forward naturally without forced intensity, and this helps maintain engagement through progression rather than conflict. The environment reflects this stability. It becomes a space where he operates with clarity and control instead of uncertainty, and this shows that he has fully adapted to the demands placed on him. The idea of belonging is now completely internal. It does not depend on validation or external factors. It exists in how he understands himself and how he carries that understanding into every situation, and this internal stability allows him to move forward with confidence. As the narrative continues in this direction, it reinforces that true growth at this level is about maintaining clarity, adapting without losing structure, and continuing to improve while staying consistent, and this gives the story depth while keeping it connected and meaningful without repetition. Michael now reaches a phase where control turns into instinct, and this is where the film shows the most complete version of his growth because nothing feels forced anymore. Everything he does flows naturally from understanding that has been built over time. His movements are no longer something he has to think through step by step. They happen with clarity and purpose, and this makes his performance feel stable even under pressure. You can see that he does not get pulled into fast situations, he stays ahead of them, reading what is happening and placing himself in the right position before problems even appear, and this level of anticipation reflects a deep awareness that separates him from where he started. The environment around him continues to demand consistency, but now it feels like a system he fully understands, not something he needs to adjust to, and this shows that he has moved beyond adaptation into control. The influence of the Tui family is still present, but now it exists completely within him, in the way he handles pressure, in the way he stays grounded, and in the way he keeps his focus steady without needing external support, and this makes his independence feel natural and complete. Another important detail here is how Michael begins to operate with a clear sense of responsibility that does not come from expectation alone. It comes from understanding the impact of his role, and this allows him to contribute in a way that strengthens everything around him. He aligns his actions with purpose, supports the flow of the system, and avoids unnecessary reactions, and this shows a level of maturity that goes beyond individual performance. The film presents this progression in a smooth and controlled way, avoiding unnecessary intensity, and this keeps the narrative grounded and realistic. His personality remains consistent, quiet, and composed, but now that calmness carries confidence, authority, and certainty, and this subtle transformation continues to define his character. The pacing remains steady, allowing the story to move forward without forced drama, and this helps maintain engagement through continuity rather than conflict. The environment reflects this stability. It becomes a space where he operates with awareness and precision instead of uncertainty, and this shows that he has fully adapted to every demand placed on him. The idea of belonging is now fully internal. It no longer depends on where he is or who is around him. It exists in how he sees himself and how he carries that understanding into every situation, and this internal stability becomes the strongest part of his journey. As the story continues, it reinforces that growth at this level is about maintaining control, trusting your understanding, and continuing to improve without losing consistency, and this gives the narrative a sense of completeness while still allowing it to move forward in a natural and grounded way. Michael reaches a point where the difference between effort and control becomes clear, and this is where the film shows that true development is not about how hard someone works in a moment but how consistently they operate across every moment without losing direction. His actions become efficient, nothing feels wasted, every movement connects to a purpose, and this reflects a level of understanding that has been built over time rather than achieved suddenly. He no longer relies on reacting to situations. He shapes them through positioning, timing, and awareness, and this allows him to stay in control even when conditions change. The environment continues to place demands on him, but now those demands feel like part of a system he fully understands, not something that creates pressure, and this shift shows that he has moved beyond adaptation into full control of his role. The influence of the Tui family remains deeply present in how he maintains balance, stays grounded, and avoids unnecessary distractions, and this reinforces that their support has become part of how he thinks and acts rather than something external. He does not need guidance to stay on track. He carries that guidance within himself, and that independence defines this phase of his journey. Another important aspect here is how Michael begins to manage complexity without letting it slow him down. He processes information quickly, filters what matters, and acts with clarity, and this shows that his awareness has reached a level where he can handle pressure without hesitation. He aligns his actions with the flow around him, contributing to stability instead of reacting to disruption, and this reflects a deeper understanding of his role within a larger system. The film presents this progression in a controlled and natural way, avoiding unnecessary emphasis, and this keeps the narrative grounded. His personality remains consistent, quiet, and composed, but now that calmness carries confidence, authority, and certainty, and this subtle transformation continues to define his character. The pacing remains steady, allowing the story to move forward without forced intensity, and this helps maintain engagement through continuity rather than conflict. The environment reflects this stability. It becomes a space where he operates with clarity and precision instead of uncertainty, and this shows that he has fully adapted to every challenge. The idea of belonging is now completely internal. It does not depend on external validation or circumstances. It exists in how he understands himself and how he carries that understanding into every situation, and this internal stability allows him to move forward with confidence. As the narrative continues, it reinforces that growth at this level is about maintaining efficiency, adapting without losing structure, and continuing to improve while staying consistent. And this gives the story depth while keeping it connected and meaningful without repetition. Michael reaches a phase where performance and identity fully align, and this is where the film shows that everything he has built is no longer something separate from who he is. It becomes part of how he naturally operates in every situation. His actions are no longer guided by effort alone. They come from a clear understanding that has settled into instinct, and this allows him to stay consistent without needing to think through every step. You can see that he processes situations quickly, identifies what matters, and acts with precision, and this reflects a level of control that removes hesitation completely. The environment continues to demand results, but now those demands do not create pressure. They become part of the rhythm he moves within, and this shows that he has reached a point where stability is his normal state. The influence of the Tui family remains deeply rooted in how he carries himself, especially in how he stays grounded, focused, and composed regardless of what is happening around him, and this reinforces that their impact has become part of his internal structure. He no longer depends on external direction or validation. He trusts his understanding and moves forward with clarity, and this independence defines this phase of his journey. Another important element here is how Michael begins to lead through action rather than words. His presence itself creates stability, his decisions support the system around him, and his consistency sets a standard for others, and this shows that his role has expanded beyond individual performance. He aligns his actions with purpose, maintains balance under pressure, and avoids unnecessary reactions, and this reflects maturity at a deeper level. The film presents this progression in a smooth and controlled way, avoiding unnecessary emphasis, and this keeps the narrative grounded and realistic. His personality remains consistent, quiet, and composed, but now that calmness carries authority and confidence, and this subtle transformation continues to define his character. The pacing remains steady, allowing the story to move forward naturally without forced intensity, and this helps maintain engagement through continuity rather than conflict. The environment reflects this stability. It becomes a space where he operates with awareness and precision instead of uncertainty, and this shows that he has fully adapted to every demand placed on him. The idea of belonging is now completely internal. It no longer depends on where he is or who is around him. It exists in how he understands himself and how he carries that understanding into every situation, and this internal stability becomes the strongest part of his journey. As the story continues in this direction, it reinforces that true growth is about maintaining control, trusting your ability, and continuing to improve without losing consistency, and this gives the narrative a strong sense of completion while still allowing it to move forward in a natural and grounded way. Michael now operates at a level where every action reflects control without visible effort, and this is where the film shows that his growth has fully settled into his identity, because nothing feels forced or reactive anymore. Everything he does is guided by understanding that has become instinct. His awareness is constant. He reads situations early, positions himself with accuracy, and makes decisions that keep everything stable, and this level of clarity allows him to handle pressure without changing his behavior. The environment continues to demand performance, but now those demands feel like part of a system he has mastered rather than something he needs to overcome, and this shows that he has reached a point where stability is no longer a goal, it is his standard. The influence of the Tui family remains present in how he maintains balance, stays grounded, and avoids unnecessary reaction, and this reinforces that their support has become part of how he thinks and acts. He does not depend on guidance anymore, he carries it within himself, and that independence defines this phase of his journey. Another important aspect here is how Michael maintains control even when situations become unpredictable. He does not lose focus, he adapts without hesitation, and he continues to operate with the same level of precision, and this shows that his growth is not limited to one set of conditions. He aligns his actions with the flow around him, supports the structure he is part of, and avoids actions that could disrupt stability, and this reflects a deeper understanding of his role. The film presents this progression in a steady and grounded way, avoiding unnecessary intensity, and this keeps the narrative smooth and realistic. His personality remains consistent, quiet, and composed, but now that calmness carries authority and confidence, and this subtle transformation continues to define his character. The pacing remains balanced, allowing the story to move forward without forced drama, and this helps maintain engagement through continuity rather than conflict. The environment reflects this stability. It becomes a space where he operates with clarity and control instead of uncertainty, and this shows that he has fully adapted. The idea of belonging is now fully internal. It exists in how he understands himself and how he carries that understanding into every situation, and this internal stability allows him to move forward with confidence. As the narrative continues, it reinforces that true growth at this level is about maintaining control under any condition, adapting without losing structure, and continuing to improve while staying consistent, and this gives the story depth while keeping it connected and meaningful without repetition. Michael moves into a phase where refinement becomes the main driver of progress, and this adds depth because the difference now is not about doing something right or wrong, it is about doing it with greater efficiency, better timing, and clearer awareness every time, and this kind of improvement is subtle but powerful because it shows that his growth has reached a level where small adjustments create real impact. He starts eliminating unnecessary movement, reducing hesitation to zero, and aligning every action with purpose, and this makes his performance feel controlled and reliable even in demanding situations. You can see that he no longer wastes energy reacting to distractions. He filters everything quickly and focuses only on what matters. And this ability reflects a strong internal structure that has been built over time. The environment continues to challenge him, but now those challenges feel like part of a system he fully understands, not something that disrupts his rhythm, and this shows that he has moved beyond adaptation into full control of his role. The influence of the Tui family remains deeply rooted in how he stays grounded, composed, and focused, and this reinforces that their support has become part of how he operates rather than something external. He does not need reminders or direction. He carries that influence within him, and that independence defines this stage of his journey. Another important element here is how Michael begins to influence the flow around him without forcing it. His presence creates stability, his decisions reduce pressure, and his consistency supports the entire system, and this shows that his role has expanded beyond individual performance into something more connected. He aligns his actions with timing and awareness, avoids unnecessary reaction, and maintains balance even when situations become complex, and this reflects a deeper level of maturity. The film presents this progression in a steady and controlled way, avoiding unnecessary emphasis, and this keeps the narrative grounded and realistic. His personality remains consistent, quiet, and composed, but now that calmness carries authority, confidence, and certainty, and this subtle transformation continues to define his character. The pacing remains steady, allowing the story to move forward naturally without forced intensity, and this helps maintain engagement through continuity rather than conflict. The environment reflects the stability. It becomes a space where he operates with clarity and precision instead of uncertainty, and this shows that he has fully adapted to every demand placed on him. The idea of belonging is now completely internal. It does not depend on external validation or circumstances. It exists in how he understands himself and how he carries that understanding into every situation, and this internal stability becomes the strongest part of his journey. As the story continues in this direction, it reinforces that true growth is defined by refinement, awareness, and the ability to maintain control while continuously improving, and this gives the narrative a sense of completion while still allowing it to move forward in a natural and grounded way. Michael now operates at a level where consistency and precision merge into a single rhythm, and this phase shows that his development is no longer about reaching new milestones. It is about sustaining a standard that does not break under any condition, and this is where the film highlights the strongest version of his growth without needing dramatic moments to prove it. His awareness becomes constant, not something he turns on and off, but something that stays active in every situation, allowing him to read changes instantly and adjust without hesitation, and this level of control reflects a mindset that has fully matured. He no longer reacts to pressure. He absorbs it, keeps his structure intact, and continues forward with clarity, and this ability shows that his growth is stable rather than temporary. The environment continues to demand performance, but those demands now feel integrated into his routine, not something separate that needs to be handled, and this shows that he has reached a point where he is fully aligned with the system around him. The influence of the Tui family remains deeply embedded in how he maintains balance, stays grounded, and avoids unnecessary distraction, and this reinforces that their support has become part of his internal behavior rather than something external. He does not rely on guidance anymore. He carries that guidance within himself, and this independence defines this stage of his journey. Another important aspect here is how Michael begins to maintain stability not only for himself but for everything around him. His decisions create space, reduce pressure, and support the flow of the system, and this shows that his role has expanded beyond individual performance into something more connected and influential. He aligns his actions with purpose, avoids unnecessary reaction, and maintains control even in unpredictable situations, and this reflects a deeper level of awareness and responsibility. The film presents this progression in a smooth and controlled way, avoiding unnecessary intensity, and this keeps the narrative grounded and realistic. His personality remains consistent, quiet, and composed, but now that calmness carries authority, confidence, and certainty, and this subtle transformation continues to define his character. The pacing remains steady, allowing the story to move forward without forced drama, and this helps maintain engagement through continuity rather than conflict. The environment reflects this stability. It becomes a space where he operates with clarity and control instead of uncertainty, and this shows that he has fully adapted to every demand placed on him. The idea of belonging is now completely internal. It no longer depends on where he is or who is around him. It exists in how he understands himself and how he carries that understanding into every situation, and this internal stability allows him to move forward with confidence. As the narrative continues in this direction, it reinforces that true growth is about maintaining control, adapting without losing structure, and continuing to improve while staying consistent. And this gives the story a strong sense of completion while still allowing it to progress in a natural and grounded way. Michael reaches a phase where performance, awareness, and identity are completely aligned, and this is where the film shows that his journey has moved beyond visible growth into sustained mastery that holds under any condition without needing reinforcement. His actions now carry a level of efficiency where nothing feels forced or delayed. Every movement connects with purpose, and every decision reflects clarity that has been built through experience rather than instruction. He does not look for moments to prove himself. He operates at a level where consistency itself becomes proof, and this shift is important because it shows that his development is no longer dependent on outcomes. It is defined by process and control. The environment continues to place demands on him, but those demands no longer feel separate from his routine. They become part of how he functions, and this indicates that he has fully integrated into a system that once felt unfamiliar. He reads situations before they fully develop, adjusts his positioning with precision, and makes decisions that simplify complexity instead of reacting to it, and this ability reflects a deep understanding of both his role and the space around him. The influence of the Tui family remains present not as guidance but as a foundation that shapes how he handles pressure, maintains balance, and avoids unnecessary distraction, and this shows that their impact has become permanent within his mindset. He does not depend on external feedback to stay aligned. He trusts his own understanding, and this internal confidence allows him to move forward without hesitation. Another important element in this phase is how Michael begins to influence stability beyond his immediate role. His presence alone reduces uncertainty, his decisions create structure, and his consistency allows others around him to operate with clarity, and this shows that his growth has extended into leadership through action rather than words. He does not need to control everything around him. He aligns himself with the flow of the system and strengthens it through precision and timing, and this reflects a level of maturity that goes beyond individual success. The film presents this progression in a steady and controlled manner, avoiding exaggerated moments, and this keeps the narrative grounded in realism. His personality remains consistent, he stays quiet and composed, but now that calmness carries authority and certainty, and this subtle transformation feels authentic because it has been built gradually without sudden shifts. The pacing continues to remain balanced, allowing the story to move forward without forcing intensity, and this creates a smooth experience where progression feels natural. The environment reflects this stability. It becomes a space where he operates with clarity rather than uncertainty, and this shows that he has fully adapted to every condition placed in front of him. The idea of belonging is now completely internal. It is not tied to location or validation. It exists in how he understands himself and how he carries that understanding into every situation, and this internal stability defines the strongest version of his character. Another layer that becomes clear here is how he manages responsibility without allowing it to become pressure. He carries expectations with control rather than weight, and this allows him to stay consistent even when demands increase. He does not look for shortcuts or moments of relief. He maintains rhythm, follows structure, and continues to improve through refinement, and this reflects a disciplined mindset that sustains progress over time. The film avoids introducing any unnecessary conflict at this stage, and this choice works because the focus is no longer on testing his growth but on showing that his growth holds without needing to be tested again. Every moment connects smoothly with the next, creating a continuous flow that reflects stability rather than struggle. His ability to manage complexity without losing simplicity becomes one of his strongest traits, because he reduces problems instead of reacting to them, and this allows him to stay efficient even in demanding situations. The narrative continues in this direction, reinforcing that real growth is not defined by dramatic turning points but by the ability to maintain control, adapt when needed, and continue moving forward without losing the structure that has been built. This phase of the story shows that his journey has reached a level where development continues quietly through refinement, awareness, and discipline, and this gives the narrative a sense of completeness while still allowing it to progress naturally without repetition or forced intensity. Michael reaches a point where his control becomes so consistent that it no longer depends on the situation around him, and this is where the film shows the most stable version of his development because nothing he does feels forced or reactive anymore. Everything flows from a clear understanding that has fully settled into his mindset. His decisions are immediate but never rushed, his movements are precise without looking calculated, and this reflects a level of awareness that operates continuously rather than in moments. He no longer needs time to adjust. He reads the situation as it unfolds and places himself exactly where he needs to be, and this ability shows that his growth has moved beyond learning into full command of his role. The environment continues to carry expectations, but those expectations do not create pressure for him. They become part of the structure he works within, and this shows that he has reached a point where stability is not something he aims for, it is something he maintains naturally. The influence of the Tui family is still present, but now it exists entirely within his behavior, shaping how he handles responsibility, how he stays grounded, and how he avoids unnecessary reactions, and this reinforces that their support has become a permanent part of how he operates. He does not need direction anymore. He trusts his understanding and continues forward with clarity, and this independence defines this stage of his journey. Another important element here is how Michael begins to create balance around him, not just maintain his own position. His actions support the flow of everything around him, his decisions reduce pressure for others, and his consistency allows the system to function more smoothly, and this shows that his role has expanded beyond individual performance into something more connected and influential. He aligns his actions with timing and awareness, avoids overreaction, and maintains control even when conditions shift, and this reflects a deeper level of maturity. The film presents this progression in a steady and grounded way, avoiding unnecessary intensity, and this keeps the narrative smooth and realistic. His personality remains unchanged in its core, quiet and composed, but now that calmness carries authority, confidence, and certainty, and this subtle transformation continues to define his character. The pacing remains balanced, allowing the story to move forward without forced drama, and this helps maintain engagement through continuity rather than conflict. The environment reflects this stability. It becomes a space where he operates with clarity and precision instead of uncertainty, and this shows that he has fully adapted to every demand placed on him. The idea of belonging is now completely internal. It does not depend on external validation or specific situations. It exists in how he understands himself and how he carries that understanding into every situation, and this internal stability becomes the strongest part of his journey. Another layer that becomes clear here is how he manages responsibility without allowing it to disrupt his focus. He treats expectations as part of his role rather than a burden, and this allows him to stay consistent even when demands increase. He continues to refine his actions, remove unnecessary effort, and improve efficiency, and this reflects a mindset built on discipline rather than pressure. The film avoids introducing any new conflict at this stage, and this works because the focus is no longer on testing his growth but on showing that his growth holds without needing to be tested again. Every moment flows naturally into the next, creating a continuous sense of progression that feels grounded and complete. As the narrative continues in this direction, it reinforces that true growth is about maintaining control under any condition, adapting without losing structure, and continuing to improve while staying consistent. And this gives the story depth while keeping it connected and meaningful without repetition. Michael continues forward with a level of composure that makes every situation look controlled even when it is not. And this is where the film shows that his growth is no longer something that needs to be highlighted. It becomes visible through how naturally he handles everything placed in front of him. His awareness remains constant, not rising or falling based on pressure, and this allows him to stay clear in moments where others might lose focus. He reads movement early, positions himself without hesitation, and responds with precision that feels automatic. and this shows that his development has reached a point where it operates without effort. The environment continues to function at a demanding level, but it no longer challenges his stability. Instead, it becomes a space where his consistency stands out because it does not break under variation. The influence of the Tui family remains present in the way he maintains balance, avoids distraction, and keeps his mindset steady, and this reinforces that their impact has become part of how he operates internally. He does not need to rely on anyone for direction or reassurance. He trusts his own judgment, and this independence defines this state. He begins to control the pace of situations around him without forcing it. His actions slow down chaos, create structure, and bring clarity, and this shows that his role has grown beyond reacting to events into shaping them. He aligns his actions with timing, understands space, and makes decisions that support the overall flow rather than disrupt it, and this reflects a deeper level of awareness. The film presents this progression in a calm and steady way, avoiding unnecessary intensity, and this keeps the narrative grounded and realistic. His personality remains consistent, quiet, and composed, but now that calmness carries authority, confidence, and certainty, and this subtle transformation continues to define his character. The pacing remains balanced, allowing the story to move forward without forced drama, and this helps maintain engagement through continuity rather than conflict. The environment reflects this stability. It becomes a space where he operates with clarity and precision instead of uncertainty, and this shows that he has fully adapted to every demand placed on him. The idea of belonging is now completely internal. It no longer depends on external validation or circumstance. It exists in how he understands himself and how he carries that understanding into every situation, and this internal stability allows him to move forward with confidence. Another layer that becomes clear here is how he handles long-term responsibility without losing focus. He does not treat expectations as pressure, he treats them as part of his role, and this allows him to maintain consistency over time. He continues refining his actions, improving efficiency, and removing unnecessary effort, and this reflects a mindset built on discipline and awareness. The film avoids introducing new conflict here, and this works because the focus remains on sustained growth rather than repeated struggle. Every moment flows into the next with clarity, showing that his journey has reached a point where development continues without disruption. As the narrative continues in this direction, it reinforces that real growth is defined by the ability to stay consistent, adapt without losing structure, and continue improving while maintaining control, and this gives the story a strong sense of completeness while still allowing it to progress naturally. Michael reaches a final phase where everything he has built over time comes together into a form that no longer needs to be tested, proven, or explained, and this is where the film quietly shows the most complete version of his journey without relying on any dramatic shift or final obstacle. What stands out here is not a single moment but the way he carries himself through every situation with the same level of clarity, discipline, and control, and this consistency becomes the strongest proof of his transformation. He does not look for validation, he does not react to attention, and he does not lose direction when expectations increase. Instead, he operates with a steady mindset that has been shaped through experience and refined through repetition. His decisions are quick but not rushed, his movements are precise but not forced, and this balance reflects a level of awareness that feels natural rather than constructed. The environment around him continues to operate with pressure, demand, and expectation, but these elements no longer define his behavior. They become part of a system he understands and navigates with confidence. This shift is important because it shows that stability is no longer something he works toward, it is something he maintains without effort. As the narrative continues in this final stretch, the film focuses on how Michael sustains this level of performance over time, not just in isolated moments but across every situation he encounters, and this adds depth because it highlights endurance as a key part of growth. He does not lose focus when things become repetitive, he does not slow down when situations stretch over time, and he does not allow small mistakes to disrupt his rhythm. Instead, he corrects quickly, resets without hesitation, and continues forward with the same level of control. This ability to maintain structure over long periods reflects a mindset that has fully matured, where discipline replaces effort and awareness replaces reaction. The influence of the Tui family remains present, but now it exists entirely within him, shaping how he approaches responsibility, how he handles pressure, and how he stays grounded regardless of what is happening around him. Their impact is no longer something that needs to be shown, it is something that is clearly visible in his behavior, in the way he remains composed, in the way he avoids distraction, and in the way he continues to move forward without losing clarity. He carries their influence without depending on it, and this shows that his independence is complete. Another important layer in this final phase is how Michael begins to define success in his own terms rather than through external recognition. And this shift adds meaning because it shows that his journey is no longer driven by outcomes or expectations. It is driven by understanding and consistency. He does not measure himself by individual achievements. He measures himself by how well he maintains his standard, how effectively he handles responsibility, and how consistently he performs without losing control. This internal definition of success allows him to remain stable even when circumstances change, and this is what makes his growth feel complete. He understands his role fully, not just what he needs to do but why it matters, and this understanding allows him to operate with purpose rather than pressure. His presence begins to influence everything around him, not in a loud or obvious way, but in a way that creates structure, reduces uncertainty, and supports stability, and this shows that his growth has expanded beyond himself into something that affects the entire system he is part of. The film continues to present this progression in a calm and controlled way, avoiding unnecessary intensity or forced emotion, and this choice works because it keeps the story grounded in realism. There is no need for a final dramatic moment because the journey itself has already provided everything needed to understand his transformation. His personality remains consistent, he stays quiet, composed, and focused, but now that calmness carries authority, confidence, and certainty, and this subtle evolution feels more powerful because it has been built gradually from the beginning. The pacing remains steady, allowing the story to move forward without rushing toward an ending, and this creates a sense of continuity where the journey feels ongoing rather than closed. The environment reflects this stability. It becomes a space where he operates with full control, understanding, and awareness, and this shows that he has fully adapted to every condition he faces. Another key element in this final stretch is how Michael handles responsibility without allowing it to become pressure, and this distinction is important because it shows that he has learned to carry expectations without being affected by them. He does not feel weighed down by what is expected of him. He treats it as part of his role, something that exists naturally within his process, and this allows him to remain consistent even when demands increase. He continues to refine his actions, improve efficiency, and remove anything unnecessary, and this reflects a mindset that is focused on long-term stability rather than short-term results. He does not look for shortcuts. He does not depend on moments of relief. He maintains rhythm, follows structure, and continues forward with clarity, and this level of discipline defines the strongest version of his character. The idea of belonging reaches its most complete form here, because it is no longer tied to a place, a group, or a situation. It exists entirely within him, in how he understands himself and how he connects with the world around him. He no longer questions where he fits, he carries that sense of belonging into every environment, and this internal stability becomes the foundation of everything he does. This shift is one of the most important parts of his journey because it shows that he has moved beyond searching for acceptance into a state where he defines his own identity. The film reinforces this without repeating earlier moments, allowing the progression to feel natural and complete. As everything continues forward, the narrative avoids introducing any new conflict, and this decision strengthens the story because it allows the focus to remain on sustained growth rather than repeated struggle. There is no need to test him again because his consistency has already proven his development, and this approach keeps the ending grounded and realistic. Every moment flows into the next with clarity, showing that his journey has reached a point where progress continues without disruption. The absence of dramatic tension does not reduce engagement. Instead, it highlights the strength of his transformation, showing that true growth is not about overcoming one final challenge, it is about maintaining everything that has been built over time. In the end, the film leaves you with a clear understanding that Michael's journey is not defined by a single turning point or achievement. It is defined by the consistency of his actions, the clarity of his mindset, and the stability of his identity. He moves forward with confidence, Not because everything is perfect, but because he has developed the ability to handle whatever comes next without losing control. This is what gives the story its lasting impact, because it reflects a form of growth that feels real, something that continues beyond the final scene, something that does not end but carries forward. The journey feels complete not because it stops, but because it reaches a point where it no longer needs to prove itself. And this is what makes the final part of the film feel strong, grounded, and meaningful without relying on repetition or forced emotion.